Welcome back. Now we're going to pick up with the section on payroll taxes and subsidies. Now that we've built an understanding of the labor market equilibrium, we can explore how the market will respond due to changes in different government policies. So we're going to start with how government policies like payroll taxes and employment subsidies can impact this balance of supply and demand. So for instance, payroll taxes, they're applied to wages and they affect both employers' cost and the take-home pay that workers receive. On the other hand, subsidies are designed to reduce costs for either employers or for workers, make it easier for them to get hired, make firms more likely to hire them. So now we'll look at how these interventions shift the supply and demand curves and change the wage level and the employment outcomes at the new equilibrium level. For example, the payroll taxes imposed, how does the employer bear the cost? Do they bear all of the costs, or is it shared with the workers? And how does an employment subsidy impact a firm's decision to hire? Does it make them more likely to hire someone or less likely? These are some of the questions that we'll answer as we delve into this topic in this lecture. It's tempting to think that the person who pays the tax or the party that pays the tax is the one whom the tax is levied on. But in reality, this isn't the case. We can compare the effect of taxes and subsidies levied on both sides of the market and compare the outcomes to see this. So let's start with a simple example. The government decides to levy a payroll tax. What would be the effect of instituting a tax? The demand curve would shift downwards. It would be like right now, the immediate effect is that it is relatively more expensive for a firm to hire a worker. It is as if their wages increase from the firm's perspective. Even though the worker isn't receiving any more, the firm is paying more. So if they were paying $10 an hour before the tax, and they face a $1 per hour tax, that's the same as a firm paying $11 an hour to the worker. So their demand curve for workers shifts downwards. The textbook mentions a wedge between the wage received by the employees and the amount paid by the firms, and this difference is the tax itself. Because they increase the cost of employment, these taxes end up reducing the overall employment level in the economy. When a payroll tax is introduced, it increases the cost of hiring workers. This means that employers might not be able to afford to hire as many workers as they did before, so employment can go down. On the other hand, workers may also feel the effect because part of the tax might come out of their wages, meaning that they take home less pay as a result. In the end, both employers and workers usually share the burden of the tax, and the overall effect is that fewer people are employed and wages are lower than they would have been without the tax. So let's turn to the model supply and demand to see exactly how this happens. Here we see visually what happens. When the government institutes a $1 payroll tax, initially, before that is implemented, the firm's demand curve is at D0 right here. After the tax increases the cost of employment, it shifts the demand curve down to D1, down here to this curve. Remember, each point along the demand curve represents the number of workers that firms are willing to hire at that particular wage. So if the market equilibrium wage is W0 right here, initially that means they're going to hire E0 workers. But once the tax is imposed, the cost to the firm of wages plus the taxes is going to increase from $10 to $11. So it increases how much the firm faces from employing each worker. Since at this employment level, firms are only willing to pay $10 to that many workers, they'll reduce wages by $1. So their total labor costs would remain at W0. This causes the demand curve to shift downward by $1. So we can trace the equilibrium point. Trace it from point A, the point that's on the parallel demand curve down here. That is simply shifted down from the original demand curve to now demand curve D1 by $1 lower. Now there's no change in the supply curve because nothing changes from the worker's perspective at first. As we move along the supply curve from point A down here to where it crosses the new demand curve at point B, that's our new equilibrium point. So the wage received by the worker is now lower. It's at W1, which lies between the previous wage of $10 per hour and the $9 per hour wage that the firms initially were willing to pay after the tax in order to keep their payroll the same. But while the worker receives wage W1, the firm pays wage W1 plus 1 on each worker. So it's as if they're still paying higher wages. Despite the fact that the tax is physically paid by firms, it affects the workers too. What we should notice here is that both firms and workers lose out because it's payroll tax. Workers receive lower wages and fewer than work. Firms also have higher labor costs and end up hiring fewer workers, or reduces their output. Now, often payroll taxes are for programs like Social Security and Medicare, so we're not talking about bad things. And these costs aren't being created for no good reason. There is, a program that provides benefits to people that these taxes are funding. And workers and society in general can benefit from these programs. But it's still important to recognize that they do cause labor market distortions and they create real costs.